Hello, my name is Dr. Samuel Wheeler, and I am the State Historian of Illinois. And welcome to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum. We are glad to have you here today. Behind me, you can see the Lincoln family. And if you look around, you can also see a log cabin, not unlike the one Abraham Lincoln grew up in, with a dirt floor. Abraham Lincoln had less than a year of formal education. He certainly came from a humble spot on earth, but he achieved something great. Behind me, you can also see the White House. He lived the American dream. And so throughout our museum, you're going to get to know Abraham Lincoln a little bit. You're going to meet the members of his family, and you're going to become familiar with the challenges that confronted Abraham Lincoln. And we hope you'll get a good understanding of why Abraham Lincoln is one of the most significant figures, not just in American history, but in world history. He saved the Union. American slavery died on his watch, and he left us with an amazing legacy that we're so happy to preserve here at the museum. So the first stop on our tour today is the Lincoln cabin. Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky, but his father moved the young family into southern Indiana. Behind me, you'll see a replica cabin, not unlike the one that Abraham Lincoln grew up in southern Indiana. The original Lincoln cabin no longer exists now, but this cabin would have housed maybe 7 or 8, and sometimes 9 people in this little cabin, cramped quarters. And Abraham Lincoln, as a young man, as a young boy really, in his teenage years in southern Indiana, was hungry for education. He read every book that he could get his hands on, any newspaper. Abraham Lincoln took 2 different flatboat trips, one from southern Indiana, one from Illinois, and he went down the Mississippi River all the way to New Orleans. And when he got to New Orleans, we think he saw a scene like this one. From 1820 to 1860, there was a slave sold in America every 3.6 minutes. That is an awful statistic to show how widespread this institution was. And of course, the worst part of American slavery, not just the physical beatings sometimes that took place, but it's this scene right here, and that is the breakup of the family. A father sold in one direction, mother in another, and a child sold in a different direction. Welcome to New Salem. When Abraham Lincoln struck out on his own to make his own life, Mr. Lincoln realizes what his dream is: to become a lawyer and to become a member of the Illinois State Legislature. And he's eventually elected to the first of 4 consecutive terms in the Illinois Legislature. And so by the time Mr. Lincoln leaves New Salem, he's really found his place in Illinois. By 1858, Abraham Lincoln has a new party, the Republicans, and they are devoted to stopping the extension of slavery. At this point in America, there's almost 4 million slaves. Abraham Lincoln, the Republican Party, they have a different vision than the Democrats. Stephen A. Douglas, who Mr. Lincoln is on the podium with here, is one of the most prominent Democrats in the country. The Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858, Abraham Lincoln is able to earn a national reputation because he and Douglas are debating the most divisive issue of the day, American slavery. All the major newspapers across the country are covering their debates. This room is a room from Abraham Lincoln's law office. Abraham Lincoln was an extremely hard-working lawyer. Mr. Lincoln has brought his 2 young children to his law office. And as you can see, they were not known to be very well behaved. Abraham and Mary Lincoln were notoriously lax parents. They both had in common the unfortunate circumstance of not having very happy childhoods themselves. They were on the same page in the sense that they wanted to give their children something they never had, which was a really happy childhood. And for them, that meant to give them really an unrestrained childhood. They were not disciplinarians.
He's inadequate, naive, and unqualified.
He's a dictator whose crimes against the free people of the South.
This hallway, the disorienting aspect, gives you an insight into how disorienting it must have been to be President of the United States during a civil war. These political cartoons that you see on the wall, they come from not just newspapers in the Confederacy, but also newspapers from around the world, and also newspapers from throughout the North. Dirty politics, it's not unique to our time in the 21st century. It existed back in Abraham Lincoln's time. And second, despite these harsh criticisms, Abraham Lincoln stood firm. The Lincolns, when they came to the White House, Abraham Lincoln was the first president to be elected who came from this far west. They were viewed with some skepticism, some doubts about are they really sophisticated people or not. Mary was a sophisticated, really educated individual. Being a hostess, trying to prove her doubters wrong was something that Mary was very interested in doing. In this scene here, we have two important figures from the American Civil War era, Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth. Two African Americans, two former slaves, but individuals that Abraham Lincoln had met during the White House years. Sojourner Truth, an important female figure that goes on to become an important figure in the abolitionist movement. And of course, Frederick Douglass, a powerful orator. They were probably the first African Americans that were received so warmly by a president of the United States. Abraham Lincoln is meeting with the members of his cabinet. They're discussing some of the most momentous issues that would take place during the American Civil War, specifically what to do about American slavery. Slavery still existed at the midway point through the war, and in 1862, Abraham Lincoln decided to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. And by war's end, of course, the 13th Amendment would be passed, 4 million slaves would be free, and the 250-year-old institution of American slavery would be ended once and for all. The final version of the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect on January 1st, 1863. It provided a provision in there for having African Americans serve as soldiers for the Union Army. All told, more than 190,000 African Americans fought for the Union. 75% of those soldiers were former slaves. The American Civil War is known for its brutality. More than 620,000 casualties took place during the American Civil War. That's both North and South. It meant that 2% of the population died. Now today, if America was to have a war in which 2% of our population wouldn't make it back home, that means that about 6 or 7 million casualties would take place. That's how devastating the physical cost of the war was. So, welcome to the Lincoln Vault, the real treasures from our collection we keep in this vault. So this is one of 5 copies that are in existence of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, written by Abraham Lincoln himself. Abraham Lincoln spoke for 2 minutes that day at the cemetery in Gettysburg. And the main speaker that day, Edward Everett, spoke for more than 2 hours. The 272 words that Abraham Lincoln wrote in his mind to help Americans see through the Civil War, to see it through to its final conclusion and ultimate triumph for the Union, so democracy would be safe for America. And certainly, democracy and free government was spared with a Union victory at the American Civil War. 5 days after the virtual end of the American Civil War, Abraham Lincoln and his wife decide to go to the theater. They want to see a play, and about 10:15 in the evening, as they're watching the play, as the actor delivers the funniest line in the play and the audience is laughing, a well-known actor sneaks into the presidential box and brutally murders Abraham Lincoln, just 5 days after the end of the American Civil War. Now, Abraham Lincoln immediately becomes a martyr in American history, rises to the level of American sainthood. His funeral takes place in cities all across the United States, from Washington to Springfield. Today, Abraham Lincoln is considered one of the most important individuals in American history and world history.